Hello, good morning, everybody. This is the seventh forum against gender violence, and I'm going to speak Spanish since today we have four different speakers who come from different points of Spain. And I would like to thank, first of all the organizers of this roundtable, in which you are going to participate, and especially we would like to welcome what we call round zero, different people who are going to be here with us today, such as Sonia Guerra, Secretary of Feminist Policies of PCC and spokeswoman of the Socialist Group at the Congress of the and the Secretary of Gender Violence and speaker for integral protection for childhood and adolescents. Marta Ribas, also representative of the Catalan Parliament, Guillermo Matteoli, Dean of the Official School of Psychology of Barcelona, and Isabel Martinez from the platform SIMI Stop Impunity Against Child Abuse. Without further ado, this roundtable, negationism and gender violence and the parental alienation syndrome, I would like to give the floor to the first speaker, who is Sonia Vaccaro, who has a degree in psychology, clinical psychology by the University of Buenos Aires in health and labor sphere, and she's a forensic expert here in Spain, expert in victimology and gender violence, and together with Consuelo Varia is the author of Parental Alienation Syndrome. So Sonia, go ahead, please, you have the floor. Thank you very much. And good morning. Thank you very much for your kind invitation. Thank you, all of you, for the interest in the subject. I was asked to approach what I call a problem because this is not my main quality. They have told me to present my speech in just 15 minutes. So my apologies in advance if I'm going a bit in a rush, a bit quick. And I hope that later during the Q&A session, we could deal with some subjects that maybe are not going to be dealt in enough depth now. I cannot see how to go from one slide to another. Could you please help me? So I don't know how to go from one slide to another, how to present my slides. Okay, now I got it. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to describe the framework in which we are working. Half of the wedding dissolutions in Spain are agreed according to common agreement. Of this half, of this 52%, 48% of the rest go to court. And out of this, half of this percentage is related to some conflict, including the children of both partners. So, what are we talking about when we talk about this parental alienation syndrome? As you can see, this can be framed within a market which affects many people and deep knowledge. But let's see where this construct comes from. First, we have a scenario more or less around the 90s, and it's when Susan Faludi, Pulitzer Prize of Journalism, publishes her book, which is called Backlash, which was translated here into redacción. In my opinion, it should be translated as counter movement, but the backlash was a sociological movement which appears always every time there is a defavored group taking a step forward, a leap forward, and therefore there is like a backlash or counter movement which tries to go back to the initial position. Susan Faludi explains it very well in her article. And at the same time, in the US, and this is where this parental alienation syndrome comes from, a professor from Harvard, a lawyer, very well known lawyer today, very famous lawyer, who is called Alan Dershaw, he publishes a book which is called The Abuse Excuse. In this book, he explains that at different courts, they are starting to see constructs as syndromes which are used as an evasion of responsibility, avoidance of responsibility. That is to say, in order to defend those who have been accused for any crime. Among them, of course, we have the syndrome, the parental alienation syndrome. Scenario number 2, all over the world, where we see the exhibition of this construct. They say that victimization surveys, and these are surveys where we can quantify the total crime, even those which have not been reported. They consider that only 10 or 15% of the cases of child abuse come to see the light. And only 50% of children reveal incestuous abuses, or as they are called it, paterno-filial abuse or intrafamilial abuse. Out of this 50%, only 15% report to justice, and out of this 15%, only 5% is processed. And out of this 5%, only 2% reach a penalty. So only 0.4% of this crime reach the court for paternofilial incest, and the condemnation of the crime is only 0.08%. Therefore, this is an invisible crime. And this pretended syndrome tries to make it invisible. This is my subtitle, How to Build a Lie, because the SAP, the parental alienation syndrome, is what has been called junk science, which is defined as false, imprecise studies, data analysis, which are used to create a biased opinion or to promote a certain ideology. We should remember that we are always within this framework of the backlash. That is to say, this counter movement tries to go against a specific ideology. So, who invented this construct? In 1985, a doctor whose name was Richard Alan Gardner, and let me insist on the Alan because there are many Gardners in the US who are not related to Richard Alan Gardner. And he, some people pretended to be this doctor, professor of Columbia, etc. And he makes up a terminology which is called in Spanish SAP. In English, it will be PAS, parental alienation syndrome. And he's defining it, for example, within a framework of a divorce. There is a fight for the custody of the children, or maybe a claim because of paternofamilial incest, or maybe a refusal by some of the children towards one of the parents. Then this is like a brainwash, and one of the parents, usually the mother, this is always according to Gardner's definition, puts this child against the other partner, the father, and tries to alienate the child from the life of the father or mother, making him or her believe that his father is sexually abusing from him. And this is related to delirium almost. However, as I say before, he continued with his definition, and he said that the most adient therapy to cure this syndrome within the framework of science, syndrome is a disease. Science and symptoms making up a disease. He said that the therapy that had to be used was the threat therapy, which was precisely to drastically change the custody for the father who was falsely accused, according to Gardner's sentence, and to recommend the different judges, of course, to threaten the mother with fines and the child with putting him in an institution. The threat therapy, please remember this definition because this is what the PAS is told. However, nowadays, nobody continues to talk about this parental alienation syndrome because of what I'm going to explain later on. This threat therapy has come to stay, and unfortunately, it is applied and it continues to be recommended by professionals of psychology, social workers, etc. Gardner started to impart conferences all over the States, and of course, always organized by parents' groups who were kind of unfairly far away from the children. He created his own editorial. He had no problem then in editing and publishing his books. He never proved what he was after. He never presented the cases that he had observed in order to report this disease. He was not submitted to peer review. He never explained the basis of this proposed therapy because it was this one another. And during 4 revisions of the only manual that classifies mental disturbances, what we call the DSM, which is edited by the Association of American Psychiatry, he has been refused and he's not included. The only one, and let me insist on that, because of course we have the ECD, which is widely used here. The ICD has only one chapter which classify mental disease. Therefore, if someone says or claims or it's included in the ICD, it doesn't mean that he's part of the chapter of mental diseases. So the pandemic that we're going through now is part of the ICD, not for you to understand. This is a manual published by the UN and it classifies many other things. I have defined this parental alienation syndrome and other subgroups of this syndrome because it has changed the name. It's another form of gender violence, violence against women. And this is constructed of myths and prejudices against the women and about a patriarchal collective imaginary. Among other myths and prejudices, we have false reports, we have the manipulation of the children by the women, the character of the wife, etc. And this patriarchal collective imaginary, precisely what it does, is to sacralize the family as an institution which cannot be touched or altered. And in a supreme way, it turns the importance of the pater familias. What is the manifest ideology of the fear against women and children abuse, misogynist behaviors, and it wants to attack the woman on the more vulnerable part with their children. Some examples of these misogynist attitudes, I'm not going into detail, but the second book was called Sex Abuse Hysteria, and which uh, invade or revisit the. So I'm not going to dwell into this slide, but let me tell you that the critical addition to parental alienation syndrome, I think it's related to the fact that they give a simple response, a simple answer to a complex conflict. And it coincides with the dominant patriarchal way of thinking. Otherwise, we cannot explain how such an aberration in the field of science could reach nowadays, resisting so many years after its invention, and how it could be admitted or used in central countries, such as we consider to be the underlying ideology is much worse. I'm not going to go into detail, but Gardner, let me tell you that he was in favor of normalizing pedophilia in all its ways. He belonged an active movement which is called NAMBLA, and NAMBLA means North American Men Boy Love. Here is his association website. This is an association that defends and wants to place pedophilia as another way of sexual orientation, equivalent to homosexuality and lesbianism. The use of the parental alienation syndrome and other similar syndromes within justice has acquired a new virtuality with the figure of that we want to be implemented, which is the coordinator of parentality, where the training is hegemonic as far as the threat therapy. And this is what they're teaching, and this is the way it's being used. This supposed training has the support of an association called Filia, which has among its founders Alex Serrano. Another way of the use of the parental alienation syndrome is the instrumentalization of the children, parental interferences, and in Catalonia, what we use is the word of morbid dominance. All these constructs have one characteristics, which is that they go against the mothers who want to protect the children, and it's going to report on the work of the children, which within the abuse is the only existing testimony, the boy or the girl. This is used in justice in order to hide incest, violence as an economic benefit, because the sense of custody means that the woman is obliged to pay for the food allowance of the children, the aggressor that she has reported on, and it perpetuates the abuse on women and the control of women, and uses the children as an instrument against the mother called vital violence. The argument of the justice is that there are false complaints, campaign of hate against the father interference, and the woman is accused of pretending to eliminate the figure of the father. This is always present. I have said that the parental alienation syndrome has been refused 4 times in all the revisions of the DSM, the last one in 2005. And for you to say for the first time in the history of the revision of this manual, before its edition, which it was in 2013, the vice president of the working group for the elaboration of the manual, DSM-5, in 2012, he said that parental alienation was not a disorder, and therefore it was not going to be included in the DSM-5. He had to say it with his own words, because the lobby for parental alienation syndrome was not only exerting so much pressure, but they had always said in what chapter it was going to be, in what pages, and what was going to be the title of the chapter. Even today, some people that the parental alienation syndrome is part of the DSM-5. And when you ask him where, they say it's part of the spirit of this DSM-5. This is a profile of the people we are facing. And the group of experts of the DSM-5, among other things, they say they refuse it because there was a lack of adequate basis in the research. There was not serious references. The diagnosis was not reliable. The diagnostic criterion were not scientific, and the calculation of the frequency of the parental alienation was not adequate either. So there was a refusal to the parent because of this parental alienation syndrome, and no study was validated the recommended solutions. That is to say, the threat therapy. For psychology, this parental alienation syndrome changes the scenario in order to convalidate these scientific factors, because they try to introduce it within the framework of the judicial text. In fact, in Brazil, this is the way it was done. Currently, we are fighting to remove it from the legal aspect. They introduced it methodologically in psychology. In Mexico, it was introduced, and unfortunately, it was not approved for repeal because it was unconstitutional. Nowadays, there was an order to remove all the articles repealing whatever is not constitutional, such as the parental alienation syndrome. It doesn't make sense to still have it, but there are 11 states who keep some of these articles. And of course, it erase the advances in evolutionary psychology. It degrades psychology from a methodological perspective because it's reduced to the ideology of beliefs far away from science. What is the position in Spain? Well, we've seen many. The most recent one, the María, they have requested that the group not use the PS and none of its derivatives, and they should be considered illegitimate. The Spanish Association of Neuropsychiatry, of course, they were against these policies. The professors of psychology in Galicia, in the Canary Islands, and the High Council of Social Workers. I hope that Association of Catalonia will also issue communication. And I think that all the associations and colleges of Spain should adopt a position such as it has happened in Argentina, for example. The idea is then it's a patriarchal ideology, an argument designed in order to punish women. And when I say PAS, I say substitutes, because let me remind you that very few people would like to call it PAS. And this is used especially when the women want to divorce, when they are reporting abuses, or when they are reporting a parental and filial incest. It's something they have made up in order to defend violent men. It's parental ideology which punishes women, and all the definitions that start from this idea and definition against women protecting all all her children are another way of using gender violence by using the judiciary system in order to punish women. Of course, it is necessary to change. It is necessary to change the perspective. Sorry, because I wanted to say something here. It is important to change the gaze, but also the perspective. The gaze that we use, how we interpret, for example, the adultocentric and androcentric perspective. The gaze which cancels the hierarchical differences of gender in the interpretation of the laws to consider children as beings of rights and rights, and to have dubio pro feels prevalence. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much for your attention. I think I have been able to complete my explanation in these 15 minutes. Thank you very much. Hello. Thank you very much, Sonia. That was a great introduction. And today we're going to listen to another speaker now, and her name is María Daza Bonachela. She's author of the book Listening to the Victims. She's a legal analyst in feminism.net, member of Legal Women Tennis, and co-author of Paternal Abuse Social Science at the platform in Granada. María del Mar, you have the floor. You're going to speak about how to implement the parental alienation syndrome. Good morning. Thank you very much. The computer is showing very strange things. It's talking about updating. Let's see if I can share my presentation with you. Just a moment, please. Bear with me. This last minute technical issues. I don't know why we cannot share it as a presentation. That's it. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the platform against gender violence in Barcelona and the Conexus Association for organizing this roundtable, which is of a high importance for many boys, girls, and women who suffer this type of gender violence disguise, which is not part of our statistics and which is institutionalized. And thank you very much also for inviting me to participate in this roundtable. The parental alienation syndrome and its substitutes, as Sonia has explained very well, is part of our institutions and is deeply rooted in the Catalan institutions, among many others. So these are some of the documents of the legal department of the Generalitat of Catalunya, which are still part of the web of the Catalan government. In my presentation, I have shown the links of each one of the documents I'm showing in case you want to take a closer look, and you can see that these things continue to be there as part of the policy of the Catalan government. This parental alienation syndrome is completely valid here. It is not questioned, and it's considered that when a boy or a girl refuses to relate to one of the parents, it's because he's suffering this parental alienation syndrome. Nobody's asking him what are the reasons of the refusal to stay the night or to relate to his parent or her parent, but it's not important. It is interpreted that this refusal is due to parental alienation, maternal manipulation, and it has a hypothesis which cannot be proved wrong, because any attempt to prove the reasons for the refusal is going to be taken as a symptom of this parental alienation syndrome. So it's completely reverse. So this is the official stand of the Catalan government of the Generalitat of Catalonia. Yes, because the parliament refused to prove the application of this law. It looks neutral, but the positioning of those who defend it is the good interest. It's a pre-cooked recipe, and it's coherent with tradition. And what is this tradition? Well, it's already mentioned it also. Well, something which is deeply rooted in our cultural imaginary, blaming women for all evils, especially those related to the actions of men against her. So this is a strong narration, avoiding the possible consequences of the actions. It neutralizes the victim and it doesn't listen to the victim. If you take a closer look to the different narrations that I'm detailing in my slide, you will see that they confirm what I'm saying, and the PAS is deeply rooted in this tradition of comparing women, neutralizing the victim, and avoid taking a look to what happened during the victim. There are many people interested in keeping this tradition. Who are those people? Who are those people who are interested? Well, those who are more interested are abusive parents, of course, who defend their innocence and they blame the mother and the child of being manipulated. There are also those who neglect all this and they claim all these rights, but they are machos and they think they do everything great and it's a mother's fault. And one and the other are deeply organized in SOSPAPA, ANASAP, and other types of organizations, and now it is used in some political parties such as Vox, who want to give the legal status to parental alienation syndrome. Some parents don't know how to solve the problems with their children, and some women fall into this recipe of parental alienation syndrome in front of gender abuse, gender violence, which is difficult to prove, but they don't know that the recipe was not made for them and it's not going to work as it works for the fathers. These fathers have, of course, those who defend them. And there is an important business for lawyers, psychologists, social workers, and the star of the play, which is the parental coordination. But there is another layer from a social perspective underlying, underpinning of this, which is that people who are close to the children, family members, friends, work colleagues of these fathers accused of abuses of sexual abuses, which of course they don't commit in front of the family members, friends, or working colleagues. So for all this group of the population, which is a dispersed group, members of the population, it's much easier to believe those they know than trying to find out the reasons for refusal from the children, to listen to the child, to believe him or her, to get to know the horror he's going through or she's going through, or to avoid conflict. To believe him, it's easier and is less disturbing. And then we have those who defend this professional deformation of these lawyers, parental coordinators, and this is a business that unfortunately we are all paying with our taxes, a profitable business, trying to find information about technical people on parental alienation syndrome. I tweeted this article and I received an answer from the delegate of the government saying that these are not official courses, but they are courses paid by the state, not only because of this, but also other subsidies from the autonomous community, as it was published by Marisa in Diario Público. For example, the community of Madrid has a subsidy for the Filia Foundation, extreme right foundation promoted by the judge Serrano, and they're teaching this type, they're imparting this type of ideology. From the point of view, from the legal point of view, it's a complete aberration. It doesn't make sense. The PAS and any of its formal professionals without any training on gender violence or sexual abuse, neither on child abuse. And in theory, according to the formulation of the theory, these are reasons not to apply the parental alienation syndrome. But of course, as we have already explained, if you don't have a training, you're not going to recognize these cases. And the interpretation would be a parental alienation syndrome, any reason given by the child. Therefore, they don't listen to the children, but of course, they use the hypothesis of the father and they say there is no reason for the child refusal and they blame the mother and they punish the mother and the child without any trial and without any possibility of defense. That is to say, this accusation of parental alienation syndrome or parental interference or instrumentalization of the conflict or morbid warrenness in practice is like juris et iure assumption, but without any law having established it. In fact, there was a law for this type of presumption, and it will be non-applicable. First, the PAS treats the children as if they were imbeciles, not as subjects but objects and liars. If there was a refusal produced by a campaign of degrading of one of the parents, this will be the subject of a crime of psychological violence. Of course, we cannot apply this presumption of innocence to all the crimes except the ones committed by the mother. This will be against all principles of law. But this is what the parental alienation syndrome does, accusing the mother, and everything that the mother says or has to defend her children is useless. The application of this nonsense produces as a first effect that the accusations are not viable except when the consequences are absolutely clear and terrible, such as, for example, the cases of serious lesions or children pregnancy. In this case, don't worry, because the mother will be accused of being complice of these facts committed by the father against the children. Except these cases, these reports are always filed, and of course, the mothers and the children are more far and away. The children are no longer protected because they were asking for protection, and this is why they spoke up. And the legal problems for the mother and the professionals who reflect in the report the abuse they are detecting. What am I talking? I'm talking such as these cases, the famous free childhood case, and many others, where a psychologist, a social worker, there are more women working in these spheres, usually, informed by this ideology and ignorant of reality of child abuse, decides that the worry of the mother is a morbid worriness, and, for example, the genital lesions that the child had after spending the weekend uh, with the father and the girl is explaining and she doesn't want to go with her father is just a morbid concern. The morbid is not the abuse, and if the technician is not interested in this, she or he is not going to ask about this. We are going to talk about mom now. I'm not going to ask you about that because I don't want to listen to what you want to say about your dad, so I'm not asking. So this is what we call parental alienation syndrome, which is institutional violence, gender institutional violence with all its letters and definitions. Of course, does not only happen in Catalonia, also in the Basque Country, where the instrument for evaluation, as it happens in Andalusia, reflects the instruments of this conflict as one of the hypotheses that should give way to protection of the minor. Same thing in Andalusia and in Mexico. Even within the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, we find documents that presuppose that the parental alienation syndrome exists, but it's part of everything. But the mothers don't want to be silent any longer. They defend their children and they defend their rights, such as the mothers of free childhood, such as Ángela González Carreño, although uh, they were able to report on the technical experts of the government. She's still not with her mother. Her mother is Spanish, away from her mother, such as Silva Quiles. Mothers who are here with us today in this round. These are women who are facing the institutional patriarchal stubbornness to make them guilty. The lack of capacity of the institutions to listen to them, to provide protection for them, and the only thing protecting those children when this therapy is applied, therapy of maybe forcing the paternal custody because they are saying ugly things from their fathers. So we have to silence them. The only protection they have is that the father knows that the mother is never going to stop attempting protecting her child. And in a way, the focus are on him. And if he causes an invisible harm to his child, there are some warning lights. He will have to respond for this. This is the only thing. But justice, which is quick to protect the interest of these refused parents when it comes to protect the children and the mothers, unfortunately, it becomes impossible to operate and don't listen. For example, more than a year, she claimed and filed some measures which have not been adopted, and Irune and her daughter are still punished one after the other. So the justice is always after these protective measures, such as the case of María Sevilla. She has been condemned, and of course, she is going to claim back to appeal. We know, Sonia has explained, there is a great black number of impunity in these crimes against sexual freedom, and more when they happen during childhood. Very few cases are reported. People talk about 15% of cases in many studies, such as the one mentioned by Sonia, Save the Children, but I think that this report don't reach even 10%. Knowing that 90% is the black number, cases which are not being reported, 90, 85%, it doesn't matter, an immense majority of the cases. If we compare this table, we have compared the data of the memory of 2018 of previous diligence due to crimes against sexual freedom and sentences for crimes against sexual freedom. And this last information, well, not the last one, but the last column corresponds to the data dating from 2019. We see that in the immense majority of the case, there is not even a sentence. So the proportion between reporting and the sentence is of approximately 84% of the cases, uh, the level of Catalonia, and we don't have a sentence of cases of sexual abuse of minors of 16. 100% of the cases in 2019, 85%, 84%. In 2018, there was no sentence in the cases of sexual abuse of under 16s. Oh my God, I'm running out of time. Well, it's not that they don't condemn it, but they don't even uh, emit any sentence. So out of these sentences, most of them are not condemnatory. What can we do? feminism, the radical notion that women are human beings that have to be taken into account and their perspective deserves to be considered. Feminism is worried about studying and enlightening all these dark aspects affecting the reality of women and children. We have to apply the gender approach and we have to act and react in order to change this social situation. Having said that, in my presentation, I have included these online resources on PAS abuses and guidelines available for you should you need to take a look. And there is also a translation of an article which is called Parental Alienation Syndrome. 30 years later, still junk science. In the platform of Granada against gender violence, we issue a communique, Paternal Abuse and Social Science. 747 people have signed in favor of this article. It's available for women who need it to present it in court should it be necessary. And we need, of course, the social involvement. We need a lot of information. There are very few journalists, almost no journalists, pays attention to this type of situation. And it's necessary to pay attention to these. These are situations that are affecting women and children. We are asking for the withdrawal of articles which are just hypotheses, one after the other, and they just repeat what Gardner was saying, string of lies. And what are the tools that we have in order to face all this? Well, the legal tools that we have, although they are deficient and have many deficits and voids, they also have a possibility for action in order to face this situation by using legal arguments. And the 35 recommendation of the CEDAW Committee for the Elimination of Abuses Against Women, talks about the state responsibility by state agents and non-state agents, which can be attributed to the state, and diligence. We have to grip on these possibilities, legal possibilities, and these legal interpretations, and let's take it to court and let's fight. And also, don't be silent. Organize yourselves. Let's try to help those who need our help, such as the case now of María Sevilla, who has to face sentence of prison. Juan Arriba, whom they apply this parental alienation syndrome in Italy. And of course, there is nothing to do in the face of this situation except fighting and bringing the arguments to court. Thank you very much. During the Q&A, maybe we can continue talking. Well, thank you very much, María del Mar. We're going to continue now, and we're going to listen to the next speaker. This is an excellent roundtable that we are having today, and we are now going to give the floor to Estrela. Is she ready? Are you ready, Stella? Yes, I am. Estrela Gómez, Secretary of the AGAME Association Against Minor Abuse Galicia, mediator in situations of child abuse, institutional response in front of children abuse, together with the support of the Galician Parliament. So, Estela, you have the floor in order to explain to us a little bit the future legislation and the parental coordination that so many people have mentioned so far. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the organizers for having invited our organization to this forum and Q&A session. I think this is a great opportunity, very interesting opportunity, because right now we are debating the law against child violence, and therefore we have already translated to the government, transposed to the government and members of the parliament the fact that we think that it will be problematic in the writing up of the law, the different questions, and of course, more or less, this is the context in which I'm going to speak. Just to speak about this question, that on the other hand, is directly related to today's subject, which is the supposed syndrome of parental alienation syndrome. So first of all, just to contextualize the legislation, it is important to take into account that, well, this is the general trend which has been happening in recent years. The use of the language, on the one hand, you can have the feeling of just being a possibility, but in reality, there is a certain terminology that implies very dangerous practices for the rights of children and the mothers. And I'm making this comment because recently it was announced on the press that within this law it will be prohibited to use this terminology, parental alienation syndrome, by professionals. Therefore, in practice, there is just this brief paragraph in article number 10 about the rights of the victims, but in our opinion, is not sufficient. On the one hand, this is part of the context of victims, and of course, what happens is that the moment where there is dismissal of the post, this article will not longer be applied. On the other hand, the second phase of the parental alienation syndrome, which is the threat therapy, is not avoided in this law. And there are specific aspects which I'm going to comment which facilitate the application of this law. On the one hand, we have a prohibition within the framework of the rights of the victims to be listened to, but on the other hand, we have a series of articles which introduce a series of changes, which would be, for example, a very important risk to generalize the application of the threat therapy. Well, I guess that we are all aware of the changes, but in this threat therapy, let me explain, means a series of actions by the different institutions which are directed towards achieving that the child abandons its refusal towards one of the parents. It's very problematic in situations where there is gender violence or child violence. So I'm going to go one after the other. I'm going to mention different articles, and I'm going to take a look at some of the principles which are the base of this law and will facilitate the application of parental alienation syndrome. So it's a law prohibiting this, but also taking steps towards the application. So it's a bit of a problem. So in the draft that was approved, Article 27, there is no point talking about professional uh, evaluation. So these are the ones that we've been complaining for more than a year, what we call parental coordinators. This is not the name they give to them, but it's a parental coordinator with all the characteristics. In the different points and amendments presented, they still keep this point, and there are other ways of solving these problems. We are talking about the same. Although they say that there is the autonomy, when we talk about there is always the possibility of minor, we should always include an absolute prohibition of the application of this practice in the community. On the other hand, if we implement a law in which there is no improvement of nothing related to the right of the victim to be listened to under adequate conditions, because this is not included in the law, at the same time, we focus on the resolution of these problems and the resolution of conflicts. So we are entering in the terminology is used by some entities in post-paternity, in favor of parental coordinations, in favor of PAS, philia, which is the resolution of serious. So if we take a look at this type of terminology, instead of taking a look at improving how to study some of these crimes, how to listen to the victims, a series of perspectives, then we are making a big mistake. So there's another question which is a bit boring, and I'm taking a look at each one of the aspects of the law. Article 33, educational sentence. Although it looks something new, I'm talking about the positive use of language, although it means like a positive figure, but then we see that it has some negative nuances. It's not regulated because it means that the national administrations will determine the prerequisites and functions of the coordinator, and on the other hand, we, almost 10 years ago, we are after all the movement introduced by half of forensic, the unity of forensic studies of the University of Santiago de Compostela. We know that some years ago they were interested in introducing the teachers as part of parental alienation syndrome. They wanted the teachers to provide their opinion and to play an important role in recognizing the PAS, reporting, and reacting. So when we see this figure, is included as part of the social workers with this specific function. On the other hand, we see that it's completely deregulated, so we know very well which is their task. But maybe if we cannot ensure the training in a series of aspects and frameworks, then it is very difficult and highly probable that this happens. So we will be in front of someone who is part of the educational system, and what we have to do is to train the teachers to be able to detect situations of abuse and violence, and to have specific tools and not be afraid to report. So in our opinion, what we have to do is to train the teachers not to introduce this bad definition of parental coordination. Then in Article 37, it was quite important to see that it speaks about the children and teenagers, and it says that we will have experts of legal and forensic medicine. We've been reporting for many years the fact that these institutes are selecting the professionals of psychology, for example, or medicine, without specific criteria training in the evaluation of children. Therefore, saying that the commission of experts have and will play this role to communicate all this scientific data with the mistake. And on the other hand, we also know that in many cases, those professionals are trained or being offered this type of training by the administrations, or they want to train themselves. But often we encounter many reports in which use direct or indirect way with the name of parental alienation syndrome, or maybe by using a number of synonyms. They talk about threat therapy, and they also ignore the testimony of the children by saying that he or she is under the influence of the mother. It has to be reviewed by experts in children abuse, and we should not say that we are an institute of legal medicine, we cannot have this specific training. From now on, we're going to mention the most problematic aspects of the law. The one hand, social services, public rights as a authority, we think it is very dangerous to introduce this modification. It says that in emergency situations we can bring back without these formal requisites. That is to say, they have the complete freedom to define what is an emergency situation. What is an emergency situation? How long can it last? When does it start? When does it finish? We don't know anything about this emergency situation. How However, social services don't have any specific training at all. These are services with professionals with very general training, and they don't have at all any training of gender violence or children abuse. It seems that they can react, and maybe they don't have a specific duration, they don't know how long it's going to last, or how long it can go, or they don't know anything about this emergency situation. However, they create this space in order for them. So without using any requisites. Excuse me, because I also want to mention part of this slide. And then we also have the modification, then we have the modification of the definition of the situation of risk. The conflict, family conflict, and this is a problematic terminology because it displaces the relevance, it seems it's a conflict between adults, and introduces three situations about how to identify this. For example, the mother being the victim of abuses, gender violence, or maybe a teenager victim of gender violence. So what is the problem? In the case of victims, and in the case of gender violence, we don't contemplate the mother and the children in a global way, the only thing that we have to protect. But we just say that the child is the children of a victim of gender violence and he's in a situation of risk, then we are overlapping different types of violence. So this is a type of institutional victimization. On the other hand, the fact that a teenager or a girl is a victim of gender violence shouldn't be, we should not identify a situation of risk. On the other hand, in the next slide, I'm talking about the relevance of law. And this is related to everything stands around children's testimonials. There are some questions or some changes that should happen are not happening in order to adapt ourselves to the European framework. This is not happening, and there are some questions that are still pending and goes beyond many of these problems. For example, we are not solving the problem of the repetition of intervention. There are contradictions with the law. First of all, it says that the pre-constituted test is to report to court, but then it says that the agency of data protection, together with the court, can also compile the testimonies of the children. Therefore, this question is not solved. Another important problem with this, it says that the European Directive on the Rights of the Victim, it says that the victims have to be protected from any direct or indirect contact. This is very clear. The law is very clear. In this law, we compile different exceptions in which the victim and the parent can meet at court. They should just use technical means or visual contact. But the directive doesn't say yes, this. It says to avoid direct and indirect contact. So to avoid completely any type of contact between the victim and the parent. They cannot be in the same home, in the same area, victims and parents, because it's highly problematic for a victim to know that his or her parent is present, especially if he's a minor. As far as specific training, continues to be not very specific. It doesn't specify how to do it. It's not the enough, and it's not going to solve the lack of training by the legal agents or by forensic psychologist. And on the other hand, there is no mention to the forensic psychologist. And this is a problem because until today, this is the most relevant person in the evaluation of the children's testimony. we define the different offices of paying attention to the victim as the service of reference, that is to say, where all the children are going to go, children who are victims of this type of abuses, when the European directive says that children are victims who need special protection and they should receive attention by specific services. So we go back to not fulfilling this European framework. And finally, there is no obligation of this children's testimony to be reflected by professionals. It doesn't mean whether he's 4 or 16. There is no obligation. And this can be explained later by professionals of the psychology, which is a complete mistake because the judge is not prepared to pay attention to a sexual victim who is only 6 years old. Okay, and then we have another question, which is quite important, which is the definition of parental authority, which includes modification as far as the residence, and it can only be modified the protection of the parents, and it doesn't make an exception to situations of violence. And in itself, it already limits the possibility of the parent to have the custody of the children. Is already a problem. Have the parent, for example, go to another city which is 20 kilometers away because of labor reasons or for a personal reason. But it doesn't either mention this possibility in situations of violence. Doesn't make any sense. And together with this article, there is a modification of this crime of subtraction. It defines that the minor cannot move from one place to another unless it has the permission of both parents, applying the legal aspects of this previous article, and on the other hand, retaining a minor not fulfilling the right of this person. Okay, so in this second part of the law, we see that all these matters that we know are not complying with these visits because the children don't want to go and see their parents because they say that the parents are violent and they think that the legal framework is not defending this situation. Despite the big number of them, this situation is not solved the way it is solved now through disobedience or maybe the solution, the legal framework, but it will go directly to a subtraction crime, which of course is a serious crime with legal consequences for the parent, very important legal consequences. Therefore, as a summary, I could say this is what we see. This is a change in the paradigm, a change in the context created by this law, in which there is not improvement of the legal aspects related to victims' crimes committed against minors. We have not moved forward. We have not introduced any context facilitating the testimony of the children or the research on these crimes. And on the other hand, it is specifically prohibited in the legal framework and the victim of the framework of the victim because it does not refer to other civil situations in which we are using this syndrome of parental alienation, and therefore we have a dissociation law, which is split in half. We know it has two halves, but we know that within this context, what is going to continue is the current practice, which is the application of the parental alienation syndrome, and they are going to continue creating this type of situation. Our association, AGAME, one of the things that we are requesting in our proposals, the proposals that we presented to the parliamentary groups and the government, was to prohibit forced relationships of children with their parents, because we understand that we cannot oblige anybody to establish an emotional link with his or her parents. So this is part of the fundamental rights, and this should be course, reflected in the law. But it hasn't happened unless we take this step forward, in my opinion, and things will continue to be the same. Thank you very much.
En la justicia, en los tribunales. Nace por y para ser utilizado en la defensa de hombres acusados de abusos o agresiones sexuales a los hijos e hijas. Y ha explicado muy bien Sonia que Gardner fue el inventor del presunto síndrome, y quería seguir explicando cómo entra el SAP al Estado español. De hecho, en el año 2000, en un artículo suscrito por un ex juez, el ex juez Esteban Cárdenas, un artículo escrito en la revista La Ley, que es una revista de gran difusión entre las juristas y los juristas, publica un artículo que es El abuso de las denuncias de abuso, en el cual el exmagistrado plantea que hay otras maneras de entender el abuso sexual intrafamiliar que se ajusten a ese derecho y que no impidan que un buen número de niños y niñas se queden sin padre. Esta fue la primera nota de salida. En el año 2000, las primeras sentencias con referencia al SAP en España son del año 2002. En el año 2002 ya hay muchas sentencias que ya se refieren a un síndrome que, como bien decían mis compañeras, no ha sido homologado ni aceptado por ninguna de las asociaciones internacionales psicológicas o psiquiátricas. En España, el psiquiatra que inició con una tesis fue Ignacio Bolaños. Seguidamente, y además el más conocido defensor del SAP en el terreno psicológico es José Manuel Aguilar. Aguilar, decía, es el defensor más conocido y reconocido y ha actuado en numerosos procedimientos judiciales en los que invariablemente diagnostica SAP en niños y niñas a los que no ha tenido que hacer examen. Este es el gran problema del presunto síndrome. Sí, no hay
Parental Alienation
para toda
syndrome.
investigación. No hay investigaciones sobre
So there's no research.
sexuales.
There's no research on
La
sexual
medida de lo que solo se mira la medida de lo que el niño o niña
the only thing that is really assessed is what
con la
the
gran
child expresses, and there's a big paradox and a big irony, which is that to the extent that the child argues and makes clear the fact that he or she has been abused, the SAP is even further used. So the more evident the proof is, the difficult the defense is. There's no inquiry in the process. Maria was telling us before that it's really upsetting to work in the area of, well, usually what it is used is the defensive mechanism of denial. This is a taboo, and the majority of professionals dig in because they are not ready intellectually and emotionally to work in this area. Thinking that a boy or a girl can invent sexual abuse is just crazy, and it becomes oftentimes comfortable in this patriarchal world, considering that the mothers are the ones that push them to lie, and that the mothers are manipulating them. But our obligation, our professional obligation, is to place the focus on the victim. My professional experience, as Oriol was saying before, it's been quite a long professional experience, more than 35 years now. My main professional failures are related to sexual abuse against minors, because the system excludes boys and girls. Boys and girls oftentimes are not capable of expressing themselves when they are 4 or 5 years old. So the penal system oftentimes undermines justice. So the main failures that I've had professionally have to do with sexual abuse. When there's a direct abuse and when there are injuries, then you can perhaps have a case, but when there are no injuries, it's very difficult, and oftentimes rulings are not reflecting reality, and oftentimes the inquiry is poor when it comes to sexual abuse. If a boy or a girl doesn't want to see the father or the mother, the most frequent case, the most logical potential reason is that the father or the mother have been a perpetrator of sexual abuse. This week, a colleague in my office was telling me that a 4-year-old girl had been in a trial, and the girl in the hospital said, I don't want to see my daddy. I don't want to see his dick. So Valdebron said, we need to dig in. What else can you say when you're 4 years old? That's everything you can say, right? That's the only way you can express yourself. So in the trial, in the first session of the trial, my colleague asked for a inquiry, but the prosecutor said, no, it's going to be against the minor. We're not going to force them to go through this inquiry. No, that's not the problem. The problem is the sexual abuse if it has happened. So there's a major contradiction of our legal system. Oftentimes it's very difficult at court to ask for inquiries because oftentimes the argument is that it goes against the minor. So the main contradiction is that, well, there are other theaters that discredit them because it produces independence. Also places the focus towards the mother, and of course there's neutrality, and we know who does this neutrality benefit. The neutral propositions don't tell us much about the problem, right? Denial oftentimes is used at court. There is oftentimes discrimination on the basis of gender. We need to carry out a more in-depth reflection about how these tools, the tools that have been defined to defend women, end up being counterproductive, and they become, well, they have like a boomerang effect. So we need to be really careful. There's an expression in Catalan that I don't know how to translate in Spanish, which goes, you need to be really, really careful because oftentimes legal documents aiming at boosting equality end up having a boomerang effect. As I said before, SAP produces indefension. It does not enhance the superior interest of the minor. And also this principle is disregarded and it is placed at the interest of the father, oftentimes the father. So there we need to be really careful because there's untrust and then there's also untrust towards women. The judicial system disregards women and the judicial system is extremely patriarchal. I wanted to take that into account. This is the everyday life practice at court. Let me give you a couple of examples. In one of the examples, the father denied the mother permission to see her son. In another case, a mother had taken the girl away because it was clear that the father was sexually abusing the girl, so the mother took her away. And the two different courts took a very different approach. So in the first case, they ended up offering custody to the father because they said the boy is used to the father and the boy needs a routine, so we're not going to revert the situation. In the other case, when there was a sexual abuse claim while the girl was 6 years old, and in theory she was not capable of expressing herself, so the court that saw the case has given the custody to the father. These resolutions, this is the everyday life of others. It is also true that the Council of Judicial Power ruled two resolutions recommending court and social teams stop using the concept of parental alien syndrome. And this has taken now from another angle. We're not speaking here about the court that punished the mother and allow the mother to see her daughter for 2 years. For sure, this is terrible for the girl. And then the concept SAP was not used. It is a very important. And here we need to take into account that there are many legal experts in the room. It's very important for the parliaments to legislate, but then, of course, the implementation of the legislation, the observance of the legal framework is key. Otherwise, all these practices will be hidden under different names and coercive therapy, as my colleagues have already mentioned. And the syndrome is being hidden under another name. So it's very important to put an end to the use of the syndrome as a tool. And the key to end with this is training, training, and more training. Long life training. Training is basic. Very important for experts to be acquainted with specific knowledge on child psychology. Another injustice of the patriarchal system has to do with the parental coordination. Parental coordination here in Catalonia being misused. Section 12 of the Provincial Audience of Barcelona imposed the need to mediate without taking anything else into account. Because indeed, women, when they appear before court, they always have the same perspective, right? They they are always considered as being difficult, like mothers don't make things easy. They always put problems. They always cause problems. So unless we carry out a deep inquiry, it's very easy for the judicial system to interpret mothers as being less easy. And we keep insisting on our customers to say yes, because otherwise perpetrators end up being considered as facilitators. They look too worried, they look concerned, and that's negative when you are in a trial. In Catalonia back in 2015, mediation has been imposed on all this sort of processes, and this is coercive therapy because there are no public services. It's a private service. The women had to pay 12,000 euros for the mediation process, and coordinators have a function which is to restart parental visits, and that's all they care about. That's all they care about. That's the aim, to allow parental visits. So this is not legally regulated. This is used against women. It's very important for the parliament to legislate on the topic. And to conclude, because I think I'm taking a little bit too long, well, Maria talked about second-degree violence. It is about time professionals, not now in the parliament, there is a debate about the law 5/8 for the eradication of gender violence, and I think it is important to insert second-order violence as a topic. I'm just laying all these ideas on the table, and probably we will have a little bit more time to discuss them. Now, to conclude, I would like to say that if mothers are meant to be good and submissive no matter what, otherwise we are punished by the judicial system. Thank you very much to all of you. All the presentations are extremely interesting. We have a lot of followers through streaming, and everyone is extremely happy. So now perhaps, well, a lot has been said. There have been many, many references to specific bills and institutions. Now, Pilar Cedo. No, sorry, I'm going to open for Q&A. We've got quite a long list of questions, and we're going to now open the session, open the room for Q&A. Anyone from the zero line would like to speak? Please go ahead. Hello, can you hear me? Can you all hear me? I am the president of the Semicat organization. We've been working since 2015. And I've got a lot to say. I don't really know where to start. Now, in courts, social workers are implementing or using this parental alienation syndrome even when there's no sexual abuse. There have been even condemned many boys that have been abused and are living with their parents. And some have even tried committing suicide. And parental syndrome is also being argued in contentious divorce cases. It's extremely severe. There's a lot of discrimination at the judicial level, and this is easy to say. As in the organization, we have documentation that proves it. In those who are claim to be experts from the Catalan government, and actually in the internet you can see proofs of them using parental alienation syndrome as a technique. Of course, now they don't say it anymore. They don't put it this way, but they still use it. Now, speaking about the best interest of minors, I would like to speak on behalf of all Spanish mothers. We claim for experts, sound experts, that understand that those who experience violence are afraid of speaking and they are never going to tell the truth. In court, we are receiving proofs of boys having to go hand in hand with their parents, with their dads, and having to speak against the father. Imagine a raped woman having to walk into the court with the rapist, and that's what our child are experiencing. That's what our children are experiencing here in Spain. Some boys sometimes speak about their sexual abuse before the father, in front of the father, and experts oftentimes don't listen to them, as well as the boys who are well, I believe that this is totally insufficient, and oftentimes the boys say, well, yeah, my dad would abuse me, but the technicians, the experts don't reflect that in the psychological report that then is sent to the judge. So this is severe. I'm a victim of sexual abuse. So I would like to thank the organization of the conference. My situation is that I only see my daughter 4 nights a month. My daughter goes to the psychologist 3 times a year since I lost the custody. And at the beginning, when my daughter expressed her sexual abuse, she was left unprotected without any psychological support. And even though my daughter was totally depressed and no professional paid attention to her, she was not assigned a psychologist. So my daughter, when she was 7 years old, she ended up telling me that her dad would slap her. There are injuries, and since for me it had been 4 years since I had claimed the abuse in my case, this helped me lose the custody. So when a mother denounces ill treatment, and unfortunately I was in the sexual abuse unit, the functional unit in San Joan de Déu, where I was totally criminalized and ill treated. The psychologist is not there anymore, thankfully. So the psychologist even told me, how is it possible that I had how did I dare denouncing this gentleman, my ex-husband? So I was victimized. That's what she told me. But how did I dare asking for a restraining order? And I had a report from the very same hospital speaking about the abuse that she had gone through. So for me, it's just a shame to know that there's only one unit in Catalonia and they're carrying out this sort of assessment where in fact no one assessed my daughter. The process was not efficient. Well, what I guess is that there's actually a lack of skills. I'm not saying that the farm is not working for 10 years old boys who know how to express themselves, but it doesn't work for younger children. In my organization, we always have the same examples. Mothers are considered manipulative, mothers are accused of denouncing things that are not true, and of course, it's always the same. It's always the same old thing. So, as it has been said before by the different experts in the conference, it's just a shame, it's just ridiculous. I don't know how to put it. Every time there's a research, I come to the same conclusions in the AGAME as a psychologist that work with technicians in the court, in the city of justice. Oh, I have to conclude. Okay. No worries. So, these colleagues are teaching professionals in UB on minors, and they never, never listen to minors. That's all from my side. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Isabel. We're going to try to give the floor to other colleagues. Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt you. Guillermo, Dean of the Psychology Bar. Guillermo, could you please unmute your mic? Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, one and all. I've been asked to introduce myself. My name is Guillermo, and I'm the Dean of the Catalonia Bar of Psychologists. I'm also a family therapist. I've been a family therapist for 40 years, and half of these 40 years I have been working with families with case of violence and the Gaia cases in hosting centers. So my experience is very much related to the psychotherapeutical perspective that aims at protecting minors under, well, so I really understand the last examples that have been shared, but I would like to say more as the Dean of the Catalonia Organization of Psychologists. Our positionment in the Catalan Psychologists organization is clear. We are against SAP. We don't consider that SAP can be considered a diagnosis. It's not even garbage. It's not even garbage science. It's not science. It didn't stem from psychology. It stems from the legal context. And even though some psychologists have supported this concept of parental alienation, there has been no, uh, it's not like it was rejected in the DSM. No, it didn't even wasn't. It wasn't even considered at the DCM level. At least the alienation syndrome is a bad diagnosis because a syndrome is just a definition, a partial definition of reality. So it cannot be considered a diagnosis, and it would require of having an interaction with all the different parts. You have to speak with all the members of a family, and then a psychologist, after a definition, of course, reality is always more complex than our perspective regard, then you can issue a recommendation. But first, you need to carry out an inquiry about every single piece of the puzzle. And it's never the case in the examples that you have shared. The SAP is a horrible simplification of a very complex reality. It's a bad science, and for sure, it's not psychology. Yes, it was invented by the legal environment, because of course the legal environment is litigious, whereas for us, psychologists, there are never only two parts, at least three or more. Actually, SAP is a degradation of family attention. When SAP was invented, we had been working in the area of family therapy for a very long time, and the SAP concept ended up degrading psychology. I agree with a lot of what has been said with Marisa Fernández, for sure, because she says that it's not a medical diagnosis that responds to specific traits. I totally agree with Sonia Vaccaro when she says that this is a threatening therapy, which cannot be considered a therapy. No real psychologist could propose a therapy based on threat. As María says, it's an easy solution. And I also insist on what Estrela Gómez says. Well, all of you said it, but she insisted on that. Training, training, and more training, for sure. Sometimes in the social services, there's a lack of psychologists. There are no psychologists. So I don't agree, nonetheless. I don't agree, nonetheless, when it comes to the definition of parentality. And I consider that there's another mistake. Time. Well, of course, sometimes there are bad practices for sure in all jobs. That's why we have the ontological commission. But parentality and trainings in parentality always discard the implementation of the unit of parental coordination in case of abuse, ill treatment, or a clear power asymmetry. Perhaps some bad professionals use it, but it's not sound technique. That's why I totally agree, and we have been claiming for it many times, and we'll keep insisting on that. For example, in the bill to protect minors against violence, we are asking for parental coordination to be legally and scientifically regulated. The more sound, the better. That's what psychologists aim at, and that's what school psychology organizations are proposing. It doesn't mean that there are not horrible cases, as the examples that have been placed, that we understand that a sound regulation of the parental coordination unit would make things much easier. That's it from my side. Thank you very much. You, Guillermo, anyone else would like to take the floor before we open the room for Q&A? My name is Marta Rivas, and I am MP in Catalonia como Podem. Thank you very much for organizing a panel discussion, and thanks for inviting me to participate. A lot could be said. Probably the most important one that I would like to share with you is that in June, we tried to vote in the Catalan parliament. I defended a motion in the Catalan parliament on the basis of this remark, of this fact. The SAP is being used in Catalonia with horrible consequences. So the two key political points of the motion that we presented was to show our political rejection, and we wanted to ask the Catalan government to put an end to this practice to any public service, be it a public or a private service. We wanted to start actions to put an end to this horrible practice of using SAP against mothers. This had already been approved in the Vizcaya parliament, and these points were rejected. They were rejected by Junts per Catalunya, Ciudadanos, and also the Socialist Party and Esquerra Republicana. Probably these last two, well, it's quite surprising that they rejected these 2 points. And I would like to share with you the arguments they placed on the table to understand what happens with parental alienation syndrome in Catalonia, probably in the system as a whole, right? Like the matcha culture, but there is a clear, specific health-related point here. Both the Socialist Party and ERC, the spokespersons that defended their positionment, are health professionals, former health professionals. In the case of they consider that sexual violence against, topics of sexual violence in the case of Esquerra Republicana, the spokesperson was not the equality expert, but a health MP that comes from a very conservative party and who had been working in San Juan de Déu in the past. So the 2 groups said that Parliament cannot position themselves before science. They argued that they cannot say something is anti-scientific. They said, well, it's a matter of health. The problem is at the health level. San Juan de Déu, of course, is a problem, and as I have identified, this point hurt a lot, and that's why they rejected it. And they, of course, chose very sound MPs to defend their position. I mean, we have a very horrible problem at the health level here in Catalonia, and that's exactly what we're trying to revert in the Catalan Parliament. And we are moving forward. We're moving forward when it comes to getting rid of SAP diagnosis. So the first point here has to do with changing the system to the noun sexual abuse. We need to we have been working from different entities, from the parliament, and even from the public services and the government to create a specific unit, a public unit based on the Barnahus model called the Child House, and that is now being piloted in Tarragona. We are now putting pressure and lobbying so that the unit follows the Barnahus logics, and we want to expand this pilot project to all the territory. And we need to take the topic out of the health department. We need to. It doesn't mean that the health department doesn't have to participate. There are amazing professionals in the health department, but we need to have a more holistic perspective. We need to be able to make sure that the health department does not have the last word, because many of the cases like Isabel's or many other mothers that I've heard about, that we all know about, stem from the problem in the health department based on this parental alienation syndrome. And then the system is not trained. In many cases, there are bad practice, and oftentimes there is an obsession on the first diagnosis shared by the UFAM. I just wanted to say that the problem in Catalonia is the health department. Thank you very much to all the contributions, Marisa. Thank you very much for all the proposals that you have shared at the Catalan Parliament level. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Marta, for your presentation. So the organizers are telling me that due to the importance of the panel discussion, we are gonna go until 12:30. So I hope that you are gonna be able to stay in the room because it's a very important topic. I would like to give the floor to anyone else wanting to take the floor. Sonia? Hello, Sonia. Well, first of all, thank you very much and congrats. As my colleagues already said, it's been an amazing panel, and for sure, this is going to help us keep fighting the patriarchal model. I would like to focus my intervention on the fact that the system is oppressing us for being women. The patriarchal system is not only imbricated in gender violence, which for sure is the worst possible example, but the patriarchal system involves different forms of violence against women. We're not speaking here only about sexual violence or physical or psychological abuse. No, there's intrinsic violence against women in all institutions because, like it or not, all institutions are patriarchal because we live in a patriarchal society. So, if this is the narrative framework, discrimination against women will persevere. And at the end of the day, women are experiencing a negative impact, like it or not. We are victims of a system that aims at ensuring that women are in a situation of inferiority. And unfortunately, it is also the case in many institutions. One of the topics that has been raised before is very important. Training, and more training. It's very difficult to fight oppression when many of the professionals we have to work with don't have a feminist approach because it's like fighting against the impossible. It is also true that once you put your purple glasses on, you don't take them off ever again. But it seems like it's more and more difficult to bring on board more people. I am the secretary of feminist policies of the Socialist Party, and I'm an MP in Madrid. I am the spokesperson for social rights, and I'm also speaker in the minors bill. Estrela has carried out a very in-depth analysis of the bill. I believe it's important to underline that there is an important team of women and men, but mainly women, MPs at the Spanish Parliament who are trying to do something which is easier said than done, which is cross-cutting gender perspective and mainstreaming gender perspective to ensure that the gender perspective is a cross-cutting topic at the national Spanish parliament and also at the Catalan parliament level. Otherwise, patriarchy penetrates all areas of social life, and that includes our resolution proposals, our motions, etc. This morning, very interesting data has been shared. Sonia and Maria del Mar said that only 10% of sexual abuse is being reported. And I would like to share a figure which I believe to be very important. In 2019, that is last year, the Ministry of the Interior gathered reports and 5,000 reports or claims of attacks against sexual freedom in the family environment. And I would like to reflect about the fact that this is 10% also, and Sonia says it's 15%. So this gives us the big picture of the tragedy that our boys and girls are experiencing, those who are suffering violence at home. But beyond that, I would like to remind you that the National Agreement Against Gender Violence clearly states that any boy or girl that lives in a house with with a gender violence situations are victims, no matter if they suffer it in the first girls, claim that they are experiencing terrible violent situations against their mothers, but many of the mothers don't consider that they are victims of gender violence, or at least they don't blame it. So this is very clear, right? Violence, even if we have tried it to stop making it a private topic and make it a public topic, and to make sure that the public organizations take gender violence into account, today it is still considered a private matter and it's not made public. And as Sonia and Maria said before, the same applies when it comes to violence against minors, which is extremely invisibilized and it's never made public or denounced. So 5,400 minors are being abused yearly, and this is only 10 or 15%. So the scope of the tragedy is major. Now it comes to the childhood bill that I wanted to talk about, the legal instruments as well as the legal framework. Marisa told us before, well, clearly they are patriarchal because we live in a patriarchal society. So unless we incorporate the feminist perspective, things will not change. We are in the process of improving this bill proposition. We have included points against parental alienation syndrome. It's a very important point, isn't it? Because we defend the pre-built proof to stop a secondary victimization of minors. But at the same time, I would like to remind you that a couple of weeks ago, or perhaps a little bit less, there was a news in the press in the Catalan context of a young American woman who had claimed that while she was having a sexual relationship with a man, at, well, in the middle of the relationship, the boy was not carrying his condom anymore. And this is a clear case of violence, right? Because you are entitled to decide what kind of relationship you want. And she didn't want to continue with this sexual relation. And one of the causes that the judge used to say that he was not guilty is that the testimony had been built on a pre-built proof. Be careful because all the tools that we have at our disposal that are aimed at protecting us can be also used against us. So we need to be really careful to make sure that this is not used against minors in the case of violence against minors. So I also agree with the topic that has been raised. I think it was Maria del Mar who mentioned it. There's an urgent need to place the superior interest of minors at the center. Otherwise, we will be condemning minors to be living with a person that victimizes him or her. And I would like to also clarify that the Socialist Party, both at the national level and at the Catalan level, is 100% against parental alienation syndrome. And I hope that with Marta we'll have the possibility to present joint initiative to make this extremely clear and fight against this syndrome that unfortunately is affecting so many men and women. Isabel's example is terrifying. Around a year ago, I attended a session of women and listening to testimonies, listening to, well, it's very important to carry out the political action to put an end to this syndrome that is just terrifying. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sonia. Now we're gonna open the room for Q&A. I've been, yeah. There are also questions for the Dean of the Psychology organization. There are claims about the lack of support to this in the specific cases, and Guillermo, what do you think about this comment? Do you think that you can commit from the Psychologist organization to publish a recommendation to reject this syndrome and any form of implementation of the syndrome? Would this be feasible? Would this be possible? What do you think, Guillermo? Well, every time we speak up. The board of directors of the school is against parental alienation syndrome. We insist on that all the time, and we have published it in several occasions. It is negative and bad for boys, girls, mothers, and fathers. Now, regarding for sure, sometimes we should be perhaps more strict. This is well known, right? It's in the memories. It's in the memories and in the minutes of in the deontological commission. 99% of the claims against us, against psychologists, are related to legal experts' reports. As I know, there are very little psychologists in Catalonia that are being sued for using the parental alienation syndrome. And this is the situation, right? This is what we can do. The school, as a public right corporation, need to enhance best practices, fight against bad practices, and that's what we do. If you would like us to issue a recommendation, that wouldn't be a problem. I can commit to that. But at the same time, it's also true that what has been said is not necessarily the case. But what I mean for that is that there is a very delicate line. If this parental alienation syndrome is being used under other name, that other name that the parental alienation syndrome is adopting, whereas it's not exactly the same. It's an assessment, right? It's a very simplifying assessment as a sub per se. It's part, if there are coordinators, psychologists, but as Marisa Fernández was saying, aim only at reopening visits, this can be a bad practice. In the coordination training, this requires of a previous process that is sometimes not respected, and the superior interest of minors is far beyond. Of course, there is a very thin line, and our responsibility is to make this line clearer and clearer. For sure, we will always be asked to be more straightforward, but our responsibility is to find the right balance and not confusing bad science with bad praxis. It's not the same. I hope that I'm answering to the question. Thank you, Guillermo. I would like to now open the room for, I'm going to give the floor back to the speakers. Sonia, that's it. Thank you. Thank you, Oriol. More specifically, well, thank you very much, Gabriel. Well, my name is Guillermo. So, Guillermo, I think that I think it would be interesting to issue a communique because words are useful and so are communiques. So it would be very interesting to be a little bit more clear in the sense. Well, INFACOP includes all psychologist organizations in Spain and also the Catalan one, right? Okay. So I would like to clarify something here. Of course, parental alienation syndrome is just a crazy thing, and it's the only organization that stems from a court and that would be cured. So this is quite confusing, isn't it? So we should never forget that parental alienation syndrome, well, Marisa spoke about Judge Cardenas, Justice Cardenas, who inserted parental alienation syndrome in Argentina in year 2000. And unfortunately, the parental alienation syndrome is being used by psychologists and courts. So we shall be aware of the fact that it is being used in our field and it's a psychological and legal construction that becomes very confusing. Of course, it's useful, but we need to know where it's being used. Now, parental coordination. Why did I consider it as a, well, I don't know what programs you know, because parental coordination is a profession that is not yet regulated, so nor are there training programs. But as far as I know, all programs are used to implement this threatening therapy. Of course, it's not a therapy or anything alike, but that's what it's about. Mothers are terrible. Boys need to be extracted from the maternal environment and handed over to the father. And this is what the threat-based therapy is about. I have recordings of parental coordinators that aim at this, right? And it's not only few, unfortunately, it's a vast majority of them. There are some people that are trained to implement this threat-based therapy. 15%, I referred to 15% before, and what I meant is 15% out of the 50% of sexual abuse within families. So SAP was invented to defend fathers, perpetrators of sexual violence, and now all boys rejecting their father are being diagnosed with parental alienation syndrome. Thank you very much, Oriol, for handing it over. Thank you very much, Sonia. Can I respond to this point? Of course. Guillermo, please go ahead. Sonia, if you mean training programs that include this so-called therapy, threat-based therapy. Well, probably you are not speaking about a training program in the Catalan bar. No. I'm not saying this is happening in Catalonia. Even trainers, they belong to the pro SAP environment. So we are at this point, right? It's not an invention. It's not my invention. Okay, if you have a specific case in Catalonia, please forward it to me. No, I'm not speaking about Catalonia because I very few cases in Catalonia. I work in Madrid and in other Spanish communities. But to be honest, that's the way it is. Believe me, I can send you a recording of coordination section. It's totally parallel. It's a dispositive that when it was created as a double-sided coin. And it's very difficult to escape. Parental coordinators, since they are attached to the judge, are also operating in the legal environment, so they have no responsibility. No one can claim for him or her to fulfill a deontological code. Also, it's a private, and we need to be aware also that in the legal framework, it is said that what is not written does not exist, and what is not claimed does not exist. But there is a lot of violence and sexual abuse against men and women, like boys and girls, which is hidden. So oftentimes it's considered just a family problem, a not severe family problem, so it's terrible. Thank you very much, and I can of course discuss it with you anytime after that, and we will also commit to, well, Marisa wanted to intervene. First of all, I would like to respond to Isabel. My solidarity, I believe that women like you and organizations in the struggle can for sure underline the situation. What Offhand was a torture room. Thankfully, the Catalan Parliament discredited the farm. Now it's all about seeing the files, the farm files that are negative, right? One of the judges declared himself a misogynist, and this brings me to speak about the following, Guillermo: training, and more training, right? I believe that in the school you need to insist on training. And I think, Guillermo, that, well, I understand that we need to make a clear difference between a bad syndrome and a bad practice. I have a very bad experience with maternal coordinators, 100%. So, do we really have? So it's a hidden crime. The main hidden crimes, especially sexual abuse against minors, my experience, my professional experience tells me that oftentimes, well, at my age, you really want to value your experience, right? and I know that family relationships are complex. My personal experience says that parental coordination is just terrible. The coordination has been coercive. The major power that many psychologists have, well, you know that the court is going to determine depending on what I say. Many women follow the recommendation, the professional recommendation, and they end up being punished and stigmatized. So if they don't let parents or dads see the boys and the girls, they are ill-treated by the judicial system. Marta, Sonia, congratulations. Go on. I would like to say that we will be present. We'll be presenting different claims. Having you in Parliament is just amazing. Thank you very much for your work. Thank you, Marisa. The audience is asking to take the floor. Maria, would you like to say something? Very briefly. Thank you. Please, Maria, go ahead. Now, off I go. Well, I would like to say, Guillermo, regarding the parental coordination, perhaps I would like to share my screen. It's a Philia branded technique, isn't it? Let me share my screen. There I go. Oh, that's not what I wanted to share, but it doesn't matter. So the parental coordination is a registered brand of the Philia Foundation. So we have a major problem here. They're taking care of the training of the coordinators training. So this is the same as the SAT, not science, but the parental coordinators are also, well, some of them are good professionals and they exclude violence cases and abuse cases when there's no balance, but some others going to focus on that, right? It's a registered brand, so we have a problem. We have a major problem with this point, and we need to tackle it. Estrela, please go ahead.
Parental coordinator was defined also and will be like living within the legal framework, but he does comply with the mediation. If the coordinator is doing a mediation, you don't need a mediator. So we cannot cheat ourselves. The coordinator, it's more within the context of the threat of the parental alienation syndrome. SSS, is it good? Well, an SSS is an SSS and we cannot make up anything. And this is just a coactive instrument. And this is an instrument that can be applied against the mother and the children. And this is something that we should understand very well. In fact, my legal colleague from AGAME was in charge of organizing a study. Well, not the study, but the survey, a document. He made a revision of different sentences where this parental coordinator was applied. And besides the fact that we cannot avoid these situations of violence, not because it's not regulated, but I think that this is one of the things that makes it different from mediation. We can intervene with victims of violence. And there are a couple of sentences where the mother is told, we know that you are a victim, but for the good of your child and for his higher superior interest, you have to face this personal situation with your ex-partner, and you have to contribute to the fact that he can relate normally to the other parent. We cannot forget that we're talking about a single mother. And there are other cases. And in these cases, one of these judges of parental coordinators in Catalonia, he's telling a 14-year-old that since he is legally responsible, and he's obliged to fulfill this regime of visits. If he doesn't do it, he can be committing a crime of disobedience. This is not a joke. This is something very serious which is happening. It's like the last problem for the victim is like kicking his ass and closing his mouth. It's important to understand a coordinator could be good. No, the parental coordinator is a figure that has been made out exclusively to go against the victims. And we have to know this and we have to be very clear as far as this. And as far as the different units of the schools and colleges of psychology, what we encounter, of course, we cannot talk about the situation in Catalonia because we don't know it, but we know what happens in Galicia. What happens? For example, if we're training a psychologist, and they are from the Institute of Forensic and Legal Medicine, but when a psychologist is defending a victim, well, there is a very harsh analysis on his interventions, and the experts eliminate the reality of many of these reports based on real questions of just the form of things that happen just about. They can do it, they could do it, but these reports are questioned when maybe from the scientific point of view, reports would be correct, but they are questioned. And the other thing is that psychologists, they don't want to analyze these testimonies of children. That's the other side of the coin, the other side of the problem. We should be protecting those people. And this is very relevant, this profession, because it's the only one that can can give voice to the children in front of court. So the College of Psychology should be contributing to helping and solving this. Thank you very much. Estrela, somebody is asking from the audience, well, this has been a very recurrent problem. How is it possible that we are providing training on a figure which is not even regulated? How is it possible that the College of Psychology in Catalonia is contributing to the training of this figure, this parental coordinator? Many people don't even know what the parental coordinator is. Could you please sign a commitment from the College of Psychology and the different institutions of different parliaments who are present here to sit down and maybe elaborate a single program, as it happens in many other professions within some legal framework or civil servants? Anybody who can intervene professionally with moral program regulated and approved by the administrators. Maybe you could change the name because, as Stella was saying, this coordinator has already been welcomed by the extreme right. And above all, the question is the following: is it possible that he intervenes at any time? Or do you think it should be like a volunteer figure, as it happens in mediation, which is a volunteer act? What can you say, the legislators and the College of Psychology? Go ahead, Sonia. Would you like to say anything? Yes, Sonia, one moment. I mean Sonia again. Sorry, there's two Sonias. Not at the same time, please. I really want to answer this question because it is something which is really important. We are against about because of the success that we have had during the last calls of the feminist movement of the 8th of March and the 25th of November. I think that we're going through some very difficult times. Sorry, we cannot hear you, Sonia, anymore. Sonia? Sonia? Guerra? Sorry, we have lost the connection. Anybody else would like to intervene? Not now? Okay. Well, before giving back the floor to Sonia, sorry for these technical issues, says the moderator, we will leave now the questions. And we have to round up this roundtable, if you don't mind. And I would like to gather some of the conclusions that we have reached, which I think can be interesting also in order for the legislators and the school, the College of Psychology, to help us, and also for the rest of colleges of Spain. I would like to start by saying that we have called this roundtable denial or negationism, because we know that negationism, as Specter said, defines the group negationist, because this is a global one, not national one, of a segment of society, and often a group who is fighting against the trauma of change and is not facing reality and is opting for a more comfortable truth. This is probably what we have said, and you have mentioned in this roundtable, a lie, a complete lie. And I listened to this like 5 years, this has been reproduced and taken to other terrains besides the legal one. It's going into the psychological one. New names, new forms, new lies, in order to define the same thing. The truth is that women should be, according to them, underneath men, and children, boys and girls have to be the property of these men. So we're facing a very complex phenomenon. Isabel has mentioned this from below. There are many women facing this situation, many men, many boys, many girls, thousands of them, and we have to be aware how serious this problem is. Guillermo was talking about the seriousness of the problem. It's a complete seriousness. When there is this justice, when different institutions give way to lie, to speculations, when they are discredited from inside these institutions, such as the College of Psychology of Catalonia. I have gone through this, and many people have gone through this problem, as you know, supporting the parental alienation, not the current board, but it was before. It's necessary to stop it. It is necessary to stop it because, in the end, when the system becomes unfair and when institutions are discredited, there is no longer hope. People lose hope. Women lose hope. Children lose hope of someone listening to them and listening to the truth. And if someone thinks that this problem is just a problem of some children and women, that's not true. We know that this figure of the parental coordinator existed before. We know that it has happened in Andalusia, the File Foundation, which was presented in the Catalan denying sexual abuses. You can take a look at the video. I was highly impacted by this denying sexual abuses. And those are the ones who have promoted this parental alienation syndrome and the parental coordinator, because there was no social need of this shared custody. Men were not asking for shared custody or specific custody. There is no need like this. Someone is creating these needs, and sometimes there are subtle people who promote these ideas and benefit from them. And this is our experience, and this is very dangerous, because when something becomes unfair, when the institutions are discredited, when everything is based on a lie, we are facing a danger, a democratic danger. We are seeing this nowadays. Many people supporting the lie directly, supporting an obscene lie. And I don't know, in this country, if other people govern different from the ones we are having today, we will have the possibility of this law to be reformed and to be implemented, and maybe we could eliminate these lies and claim in favor of the woman. I doubt it. So we have to be very careful, and we should look after for these laws to be implemented, because if to move forward, if we break the trust in the institutions, and this is what many of these people who are governing want to do it, when the science is discredited, when these professionals are discredited, we have an empty void, and this void will be fulfilled with these laws and absolute power and absolute lack of confidence. And this is what has already happened in many places. So I beg you, I beg the members of the roundtable, I beg the legislators, I beg the School of Psychology, the one of Catalonia, the one of Spain, I'm begging all professionals to be responsible. The only thing we can do now is to ask to people who are in front of these institutions to defend these principles and to be radically against any lie, and to listen to what we are saying today, for example, about the parental alienation syndrome and the parental coordinator, because unless they do it, they will have to be accountable, and we will ask them to be accountable because that's the end of it. Women are not going to be silent, and men are not going to be silent either. They try to make us silent at the School of Psychology. They try to silence us, calling us feminicedia, but we won't remain silent because we're going to vote. And unless you do it, we are going to dismiss you. If you don't comply at the Parliament of Catalonia, we are going to kick you out. So please, I ask you to listen to us, to listen to this claim of thousands and thousands of women who this year have gone into the street but are present here at this round table. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for having participated. Thank you for the excellent speakers, and thank you to the audience. Thank you.
Bueno, amb el 16è Fòrum contra les violències de gènere. Quina passada!
Brutal!
Uah, jo he après moltíssim.
Sí, jo crec que he après més que en tota la meva primària.
No, és que, perdona, jo hi havia xerrades que no sabia què volien dir ni el títol. Vull dir que imagina't la d'informació que estic retenint nova al meu cap.
Sí? Clar, és que ja vam començar parlant de les cures, toma. Després hem après sobre economia feminista, tan necessari.
Molt necessari. Jo, de fet, he pres apunts i tot, perquè tal com està el tema...
I és que a més no només hem xerrat, perquè hem fet tot tipus d'activitats.
Això és superguai, perquè no hem fet només a nivell cognitiu, sinó que també ens hem mogut.
Ai, sí, i el taller de dansa em va encantar.
Sí. Bueno, i a mi m'ha encantat conèixer les dones no estàndard. Quina canya de ties!
Supercanyeres.
Brutal.
Sí.
I a més, avui portem un dia carregadet, xerrades, col·loquis... Lo del síndrome d'alineació parental...
Bèstia.
Tela, Tela.
Bueno, noies, jo crec que amb tot això ja podem dir que tinc el carnet de feminista, no?
Què va?
Què dius? Però si el fòrum no acaba avui.
Ah, no?
Que no, que la setmana vinent n'hi ha més.
Ostres, tu!
De dijous a dissabte una altra vegada. I bueno, tindrem de tots.
Sí, de fet ens queda el taller de veus de musiquer, que tenim
ganes!
I el xoc cultural d'Apoderar-te.
Oh, amb Apoderar-te,
Que guai aquest nom.
I el temazo, la bretxa salarial.
Aquí n'hi haurà teca!
Temazo.
I sentirem dones d'arreu del món parlar dels drets humans.
Home,
Molt bé.
clar.
Moltes gràcies.
Molt dones de tot arreu que vindran a parlar i a fer xerrades. Però no, xerrades, és que farem xerrades, col·loquis, jocs, activitats...
Taules rodones, superinteressantíssimes. Molt guai.
Moltes taules rodones que encara ens esperen.
Molt bé.
I dissabte a la Cloenda m'han dit que actuaran les dones de blanc i una companyia de teatre que es diu La Melancòmica, que fan humor feminista. Nena, millor que aquestes no ens les perdem, que m'han dit que han preparat una actuació especial per la Cloenda. O sigui que ens veiem la setmana vinent un altre cop al 16è Fòrum contra les violències de gènere. Us esperem!
Adéu!
Em veus? No em veus.
تراني لا تراني.
Em veus? No em veus.
Em veus? No em veus.
¿Me ves? No me ves.
Em veus? No em veus.
¿Me ves? No me ves.
Em veus? No em veus. Em veus?